Hello, everyone. As you can see from today's episode, this one isn't something that I usually talk about, but lately I've been thinking about this topic and seeing more occurrences of it, and I may be overthinking this topic. And if you have any thoughts about this, let me know on Instagram or the Q&A I'll have down below. So basically, let's get into the episode. It's no surprise that a lot of people of color have been bullied when they were younger and are impacted by that now. So to see now that the same people who were bullying or were bullies glamorizing their culture as if they didn't tear down their culture years ago. Now, I'm not saying that people don't change for the better. They certainly can, especially with age and maturity. But I'm mainly talking about people who simultaneously have racist and or closed-minded views and also glamorize POC culture. I also feel somewhat like this is kind of on a tangent, but this is also kind of related to people who use "We Fell in Love" by in October by Girl in Red during October. Of course, this is a song made by LGBTQ artists who has a big LGBTQ plus audience, and you can still use it if you're in a non-LGBTQ plus relationship. But if you were or are making homophobic jokes or remarks, or if you're dating someone who does this, or if you're constantly being a bystander to homophobic or transphobic remarks made to your friends or there's people in your space, then you are the problem. You cannot just use the song and pretend that whatever you are doing isn't harmful to the people that the song was made about or that the artists that made the song. So of course, if you are in a relationship that is not LGBTQ plus, or even to the common, I have a lot of people who are like, oh, but I'm a trans guy and my wife is a woman. Like that's technically a straight relationship, but obviously you're not the type of couple I'm talking about because you're very unlikely to make homophobic or transphobic jokes. I mean, you probably still can, but compared to someone who is like a cis couple who do make those type of homophobic remarks, that's where the problem lies in. Anyways, back to the topic on hand. I am talking about people who use cultural elements such as names or foods, but don't even take the time to properly learn how to say it. I'm talking about people who constantly disrespect different cultures because they don't bother to learn it from a different perspective. I am Indian, so I cannot talk about all cultures and their views on this, and I will be largely talking about my experiences and my perspectives on all this. I will be going into all the points I brought up previously in more detail in this episode. First, let's talk about people who simultaneously have racist and or closed-minded views and also glamorize people of color's culture. The term glamorization refers to the act of making something or someone appear more glamorous or attractive, often in a superficial or exaggerated way. It can refer to the portrayal of a person or object in the media or entertainment industry, as well as to personal behavior actions that aim to enhance one's appearance or image. Glamorization can also have negative connotations when it involves the portrayal of unhealthy or dangerous behaviors as desirable or glamorous. So, as you can see, making someone's culture seem better or enhanced is so odd and disrespectful in my opinion, because why do you have to do that about someone else's culture? Why do you have to make it look attractive to others? The point of a culture is to connect yourself to the elements in that culture, not make it look attractive exaggeratedly. Does that make sense? Kind of. So there are a lot of examples I've seen, like the clean girl trend, which has people talking about how a lot of it is just copying POC history and doesn't really acknowledge where a lot of the elements of this trend comes from centuries of Latina women slicking their hair back or gold hoops being used by a lot of POC people in their cultures, there's so much culture that is being erased, and of course a majority of the people participating in this trend are white. Also, the clean girl aesthetic completely alienates from the love yourself as you are, because what about people with acne? Or people whose hair is hard to slick back? People who wear more makeup, who have tattoos and piercings? Because according to the clean girl aesthetic, they're the opposite. Does that make them dirty? There are a lot of people who glamorize this culture and treat it as a way to be hip and cool, and then toss it aside and refuse to respect it for the history and importance it holds. For example, according to the National Institutes of Health Gov, turmeric masks date back nearly 4,000 years to the Vedic culture in India. For people not familiar with the Hindu culture, turmeric may seem like a spice, but it's not. Let me explain. Turmeric, mainly known as haldi in India, is seen as auspicious and sacred. There's actually a wedding day tradition in which a string dyed yellow with turmeric paste is tied around the bride's neck by her groom. This is because turmeric is associated with the Hindu goddess of fertility, Uma. Therefore, a deep association with fertility and prosperity is there. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so now I know about turmeric masks and the history behind it. Why does it matter I know about this? Like, I'm just using the spice. It's not like the history is needed to use it. But here's where the necessity of knowing the culture and tradition behind something comes in. Because when you refuse to learn about this, or that you're just so ignorant about it, that when you decide that you do not want to be a hip girly anymore, that you don't want to glamorize turmeric mask, that you moved on to something else, and now when other people use it, you're like, oh, that's so last year, like, why are you using that? Like, that trend or that aesthetic was so 2019, so 2017. You forget that people have been using turmeric for more than centuries, and you think that just because you found out about it in a TikTok, it gives you the right to dictate when it's a trend, as if people have not been using it for longer than civilizations have existed. So that is why it is so infuriating that people glamorize it without really understanding that turmeric has been there before these trends, and it will continue to be used and continue to be sacred in people's cultures after these trends. And I'll be going through a lot of things, and I'll be talking about the history of it, because I feel like with a platform like this, it's also my responsibility for me to teach others. I'm not blaming you or anyone for that matter for never researching or never really understanding the meaning, because there are so many things that I probably use that I don't know the history or culture about. But the difference between someone who refuses to learn about it or just doesn't care about it is completely different from someone who just didn't know about it in the first place. Ignorance is fine, but it becomes not fine when you refuse to listen when people are freely giving you information. There are a lot of Indian cultural elements that I will be talking about, such as yoga. One of the oldest sciences in the world, yoga originated in ancient India over 5,000 years back. The word yoga is a Sanskrit word that is described from the word root yuj, meaning to attach, join, and harness. It refers to a group of physical, mental, and spiritual practices or disciplines. While researching about this topic, I came upon a blog post which puts all the thoughts in my brain and then some to a perfect post. I will link it in the show notes. But let's start with a definition of cultural appropriation. According to Britannica, members of a majority group adopt cultural elements of a minority group in an exploitive, disrespectful, or stereotypical way. This means that the adoption or use of elements of one culture by members of another culture without properly understanding or acknowledging their origins. Cultural appropriation can include the exploitation of another culture's religious and cultural traditions, dance steps, fashion, symbols, language, and music, among other elements. So now that we have talked about the definition of cultural appropriation, let's move into the actual harmful ways that cultural appropriation is being done. Using it as a fad or a trend. Like I talked about with turmeric masks, it is not a trend for you just to use and toss away. A fad, defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is an intense and widely shared enthusiasm for something, especially one that is short-lived and without basis in the object's quality or craze. Just like turmeric masks, yoga has existed for many centuries, even before 2700 BC. As Arundhati, the author of the blog post that I was talking about earlier, says that people use goat yoga and beer yoga and other styles that make it seem like yoga is a fad. She also talks about how people misuse the word yoga and the word yogi. A yogi may be considered sacred in the sense that they have committed themselves to the practice of yoga, which has a long history of being considered a sacred practice in India and other parts of the world. Through their practice, yogis seek to cultivate inner transformation, higher consciousness, and spiritual growth. In some cases, yogis may also be revered as spiritual leaders or teachers, passing on the wisdom and teachings of the yoga tradition to others. In Western culture, the term yogi is often used to refer to individuals who practice yoga, regardless of their level of commitment or spiritual beliefs. However, as I said, in India and other parts of the world, the term yogi has a more specific meaning and is often reserved for those who have dedicated themselves to the practice of yoga and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. Let's also talk about using sacred symbols and deities as decor. Every religion has symbols or deities that are considered sacred to them. Hinduism is not excluded from that. And you might be surprised to learn that Hinduism is often considered the religion with the most gods. While there is no fixed number, Hinduism has a vast and diverse pantheon of deities, which estimates ranging from thousands to millions or even infinite numbers of gods and goddesses. And if you're thinking, oh, you can't expect like us to know all of them if you wanted to do yoga, that's not what I'm saying. In fact, you really don't have to know any of them. You just have to know they exist. No one's quizzing you on them. The issue arises is when you use these deities and symbols as decor. As in most cultures, if something is sacred to the people in their religion, it is treated with respect. They are on altars, they are prayed to, they are never mistreated, and there's always special care being used to these symbols and deities. In Hindu culture, there's a lot of importance being placed on direction, as in the altar cannot face a certain direction, maybe west or east. It must be facing near the sun or some angle to the sun. If you're going to be using sacred identities and in completely disrespecting and not learning how to properly include them in your life, that is where the problem is. Many Western yoga studios try to mimic different cultures, especially Hinduism, by adding idols of many gods and goddesses and completely just disregarding where to keep them. For example, placing them on the floor or where people's feet could be facing them or even kicking them. In India, this will not be the case, as this is not only disrespectful, but as Arundhati was saying, it's shameful. But we still see idols just scattered around, just to make the space seem more cultural or intentional or real or aesthetic, might I say. You also see Om just be pasted on the walls. And there's some idols just there and some chakras, some incense sticks. So many aspects of Hindu culture that is refused to be acknowledged but still just used for money and for aesthetic. None of these make the space more authentic. According to Statista, the yoga industry in the US generated approximately $16.8 billion in revenue in 2020. This is in the US alone, and I can assure you, barely a cent goes back to India. Another post I was reading quotes a woman who says, "The postures do not offend me. It is the blatant disrespect and erasure of its origins. Yoga is one of the 6 philosophies of Hinduism. I have rarely, if ever, heard any white yoga teacher acknowledge yoga's relation to the Hindu faith. It is as if they are afraid to mention Hinduism as if it is a dirty word. By no means am I saying that no one should practice yoga. However, they should acknowledge and give respect to my culture for its creation." End quote. And I agree. If you're not only not supporting the origins and the creation of this practice, but then you are also refusing to acknowledge the creation and origin, like you're not supporting or acknowledging it, so now you're only using it for your own game, for your own money, and for your own aesthetic without consequences, you are appropriating yoga right now. According to the Yoga and America study conducted by Yoga Journal and Yoga Alliance in 2016, the race ethnicity breakdown of yoga practitioners in the US is white Caucasian 74.4%, Hispanic 6.6%, African American 4.4%, Asian American 3.9%, and other multiracial 10.7%. Is this not enough proof that there is a lack of inclusivity in studios, and there are stories and situations where people talk about this lack of inclusivity and talk about it to the studio owners? You know what happens after they bring it up? They are banned. They are faced with backlash because there are yoga sessions that are done mainly for people of color, and they are faced with hate tweets on the internet. They are faced with people creating their own hashtags about this. Do you now see the problem? That white people mainly use yoga as their own tool because they refuse to acknowledge the history, because they refuse to learn about the history. Do you see now the correlation between the lack of knowledge about someone's histories and traditions can lead to so many more harmful things as the exclusion of people's own cultures? The exclusion of people's cultures who you are appropriating. How can you tell someone that they are now welcome in your space when you are doing something from their culture? Is this not seem like appropriation to you? Is this not a trend or a fad or something that's so harmful yet so goes under the belt? Now, it's not only yoga studios or just people on Facebook, it's also brands. For example, Aloe Yoga. This is a US-based brand that has been accused of commodifying yoga by exploiting images of yogis and yoga poses for marketing purposes without necessarily promoting or understanding the underlying spiritual health values of the practice. Or Lululemon, this Canadian clothing brand that has been using taglines like "this is yoga" or just putting sacred Sanskrit terms into their merch. They are completely misappropriating traditional yoga techniques and teachings just for commercial purposes. This is what gets me mad. Like Arundhati said, many clothing and lifestyle brands have completely disregarded yoga and Indian culture just for profit. You won't see any inclusivity or models that are South Asian. Lululemon and so many other clothing brands love to appropriate yoga and meditation and so many other practices from so many different cultures, but refuse to have any inclusivity in their models. The last thing I would like to talk about is also the Sanskrit words and chants that are commonly misused. A major one is namaste. People have used this as bullying in the past, especially in school and middle school and elementary, where they like to put on mock Indian accents, shake their head, bob it around, put their hands together, and say namaste just to mock Indian people. Without properly acknowledging this and also coming to misusing it as an aesthetic or trend is extremely harmful and problematic. And one of the biggest things, especially done by adults, is using namaste or other Sanskrit words or symbols such as om and putting it on merchandise or even adding curse words to them. Not only is this appropriation, but extremely rude. A lot of this goes for meditation. So, of course, there are so many problems, but what can you do? Actually, you can do a lot of things. You can hire more South Asian yoga instructors and make sure that whatever idols or sacred deities you have in your space are there for a reason and not just because you want to make an aesthetic. You can reach out to the people you realize that you're bullying or unkind or exclusive to people just because they're of color. You can genuinely develop relationships with yoga teachers that are people of color and even invite them to your studio or as guest teachers or speakers. You can teach your kids about so many different cultural practices and teach them the origins and traditions behind this and not have bias intruding to your explanations. You can support and follow groups that are people of color instead of following people who do the same thing but for an extra price just because you think they are a model fit, when in reality they really aren't. If you're a yoga student and you go to yoga studios or have a yoga instructor and see that the majority of people there are white, maybe speak about the inclusivity in that studio. Sometimes the demographic does have a majority of white people, but more often than not, it is so easy to get someone that is actually studied yoga and practiced it for many years and genuinely has done it. And provide resources to your instructors and also be open on social media and to yourself and how to make this journey better for yourself. Really understand the traditions and the cultural value of things that you perform and do and practice in your life. Use your social media accounts to amplify and follow Indian and other South Asian voices. If you're an influencer, instead of doing brand work with people or brands that are very low on inclusivity and also just want to make money out of it, maybe it's up to you to change that. Write to yoga brands, and demand inclusive representation. And also don't buy from brands that participate in this. If you're a yoga studio owner, you can take classes with authentic South Asian yoga teachers. And also, it's okay to drop things when you realize that they are appropriative and not appropriate. You can do this change and no one will judge you for doing it. But if you know about this and you refuse to do anything, that is where the problem lies. Now there are so many things like kajal or just a glamorization of trends or things that is so harmful. And because people treat it as a trend and are so disrespectful, because like I said earlier with the turmeric mask, they just toss it away when it's not a trend and they move on as if it is something to be moved on from. People fail to accept that the major elements of these aesthetics and cores are sacred to so many cultures, and there are so many traditional aspects. They fail to realize that it is harmful to appropriate it and leave it be. Because what about the people that have been doing it and continue to do it? To be honest, this is just a form of bullying because they're like, oh, why are you doing this? It's so 2017 because I bet you the same people that used to make fun of it when they were younger. Because these are the same people that used to ostracize others for bringing ethnic food over bindis or other cultural and traditional items. These are the same people that continue to make fun of things now because it is not considered a trend anymore. This rise of people of color's culture, glamorization will end in shambles. It will be an endless cycle of making fun of people of color, deeming it as a trend, and then going back to making fun of it again. How many times do people have to stand up and talk about it? How many times do people have to bring light to this? Because even those who seem to think of themselves as a culturally sensitive or a woke person do the same things without properly understanding what they're doing. For example, there is a person I know who considers himself very culturally sensitive or woke, I'm gonna say. And he's a white man and has 2 cats. Well, he has many cats, but 2 of them, their names are words that are part of the Indian culture. One of them is Manisha and the other one is Sanskrit. These 2 names are not uncommon to find pronunciations for. I'm sure I could type in Manisha or Sanskrit pronunciation and find someone who has created a video that is South Asian who is correctly pronouncing this. So if you're saying the same thing wrong and wrong again, when it is so easy to find the right way to say it, that is where the problem again lies. But this man who has these cats does not say them properly. In fact, he says it completely wrong. So if you're going to name animals after sacred terms and completely ignore the history and sanctity and reverence about these terms, that is appropriation. Especially when you don't understand the proper meaning. In other cultures, such as many European cultures, animals such as cats aren't considered sacred. But in Hindu culture, there are very few animals that are considered sacred, and even then, people do not name them after god names or goddesses' names. If people from that culture don't even name their animals words from their culture because it's considered disrespectful, why? Why do others that are not from that culture think it's okay? Do you just want to be exotic? Do you just not want to be like other people? Like, it's okay to be white. You don't always have to try to be like other people's cultures. This comes from a very deep rooted concept of exoticism. No, it's not exotic. You're just being disrespectful. There are so many names in English language that you can name your pets. Like, why do you have to go into other people's cultures and not only be so problematic in it, but refuse to believe that you're wrong? Yes, it's just a word to you, but there's so many other people that it's not just a word. Also, stop making remarks that true maybe aren't harmful or toxic, but they're not your remarks to make. Like, stop saying things only people from that culture would say. This is because maybe your friends or around people of that culture. Like, those are not your terms or your phrases, and you're not even using it properly. All in all, stop appropriating and stealing from people of color just because you feel like you don't have a culture. You can live your life without copying other people's culture. It's different to be converting to other religions and then following by those rules. Those are two different things because culture and religion are two different things. Like, yes, there are religions and cultures where they are heavily intertwined, but believe it or not, you can be part of someone's religion and not be disrespectful about someone's culture. This means learning and understanding from a person from that culture, not someone on the internet who has no background being in that culture or no experience of that culture. Respecting other people's cultures by realizing what you have done is wrong and you can still fix it. If someone brought up something that they are uncomfortable about because you made certain remarks to their culture that you're doing something or saying something that they deem is maybe racist or problematic, it's up to you to change that. They did their part by telling you. Now it's all on you to fix it. So yes, you can do yoga. Yes, you can meditate. Yes, you can do turmeric masks. But you have to understand that you have to be respectful to the people and the origins of the creation. This goes for all cultures and all traditions. I mainly focus on Hindu culture in this episode because I am Hindu, so I can say my thoughts on it. And this is what I mean when listening and learning from someone who is from that culture. So please stop treating people of color and their traditions and values as a trend. Stop glamorizing things because glamorization is just making something look exciting and attractive. But what happens after this glamorization is over? What happens to the people and the traditions that are still being followed? And the core parts of this aesthetics and or trends that are still being followed because to everyone else, they are not trends or just cores or aesthetics. Glamorization of sacred items such as deities, traditions, and practices need to stop because if not, like I said, this cycle will end in shambles. So stop appropriating, stop glamorizing, and start respecting.